Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 6 of Loki, which is the last episode of season 1. And the first scene of this episode was a very beautiful special effect of flying through the universe and through time, and I think that sequence was brilliant. Definitely the highlight of the episode and maybe of the whole show. Very beautiful visually. However, when the actual plot started, as always with this show, it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. All kinds of little details that don't really add up. And it was kind of too ridiculous and it was hard to get to. Only toward the end, I started warming up to that whole idea of this new villain and all of that. But in the beginning, when he first showed up, I almost laughed out loud, especially because he was behaving in a goofy way and all of that. And you know, a lot of characters who are all powerful behave like that, like Q in Star Trek and all of that, so I'm fine with that. However, this guy just shows up from nowhere and he's revealed to be basically God. He basically wrote the entire MCU universe, he's the one who made all the decisions. He's the one who organized all of it, and yet he's such a goofy, silly guy. And I guess in some way it makes sense because, you know, all of these movies were always a little bit goofy and silly and humoristic. So maybe it all comes from this guy's sense of humor. I guess we can explain it that way, but still a lot of things just don't make any sense. First of all, this whole idea that there was only a single timeline thanks to this guy doesn't really tie well with the movies that are supposedly set in this one timeline, because you know, in Avengers Endgame, when Captain America stayed in the past, didn't that form another timeline already? So how can that fit in with the idea that there was only a single timeline until this point? And what about those 14 million other timelines that Doctor Strange was looking through? How did he do that if they do not actually exist? And so I guess we can come up with all kinds of excuses for all of this. Maybe, you know, this guy actually helped orchestrate all of that and actually put Captain America back into the same timeline, so there will be one timeline, and that will actually fix that little plot hole in that movie. And maybe Doctor Strange was just viewing probabilities and they're not actual timelines that actually exist. And maybe this guy wanted Thanos to lose because maybe one of the people that he snapped out of existence was one of his own ancestors, and so that's why he had to help the Avengers stop Thanos and all of that. So we can come up with all kinds of theories, but still it's all too silly to take seriously and doesn't really add up. And there was even a scene in this episode that doesn't make sense when he said to them that he knows everything they're going to say and do, and he shows them a script showing what they just said. And so I kept thinking, why doesn't Loki look at the next page to see what he's going to say next and then change it and then say something else that is not in the script? What would happen then? How will that affect it? Like, I would have tried to do that if I was him, and yet he doesn't even try. And that's what's bugging me about this whole show. That all kinds of situations, which may be illogical or metaphysical, raising all kinds of paradoxical questions, and I'm fine with all of that, and I'm fine with the show not revealing any answers, but how come the characters are not curious to get those answers? How come they don't try to challenge it? Like, if I was there, and I was handed the script of what I'm going to do a minute from now, wouldn't I look ahead to see what I'm going to do supposedly and then try to change it to see what happens? But he doesn't even try, he just accepts this whole idea. And that's what's bugging me, is that they kind of don't even try to challenge the boundaries of all of that. And you know, the topics themselves are interesting. These are very deep philosophical, metaphysical, existential questions, which are always fun in science fiction, because it makes you think about all these questions, and there are no real answers to such questions. So I don't expect a TV show or a movie to answer that, but at least have the characters be curious and try to challenge that, and yet they don't even try, at least until the end when they kind of have to decide what they want to do with all of the situation. And how come they even think they are able to confront this guy who is so all-powerful, who organized the entire universe? Is basically God in a sense. And so why do they even think they are a match to him? How come they are so overconfident they even think they have a chance against this guy? And apparently they do have a chance somehow, even though shouldn't this guy have all the technology that ever existed in the universe? So how come he's so limited? He only has the same technology that the TVA has and not really much else. I guess maybe he does, but he hides it, and he wants to die basically because he lived so long. So he wants these Lokis to replace him. He wants them to run the TVA, and he wants, I guess, to retire or to die. It's kind of unclear. It's kind of, you know, the Emperor Palpatine situation when he challenged Luke to kill him. So that kind of scene when he basically tells them that if they kill him, then they'll get rid of the dictator of the universe, but then all of his variants from other timelines will pop into existence and they'll be far worse than him. And that part was kind of interesting in my opinion when he showed how he's from the 31st century and how different variants of him from different universes made contact with each other and shared technology and knowledge until eventually they wanted to defeat each other, and then there was an all-out war between the timelines until only one of them survived, and he is apparently the nice guy of the bunch, and so his other variants will be more evil, which is a nice setup for future shows and movies. And I'm kind of curious if it will be the same actor playing him or other actors, because they've established that variants can be played by different actors supposedly being the same character, and so it doesn't have to be the same actor, even though I think it would be nice if it would be. And that's also something that's been bugging me in this whole show, when they keep saying that, this female Loki is the same person, and yet how can she possibly be the same person when she's genetically different? And we've seen all the other Lokis who look nothing alike, and so it doesn't make sense for them to be the same person and just from a different timeline. It's genetically different people altogether, so how come this guy even says that they are the same person, which makes no sense. And I have an easy excuse to explain all these Loki variants. Remember that Loki is adopted, that he's actually an ice giant who Odin picked up as a baby that survived the war on that ice planet and took him in and raised him as his own child and called him Loki. Well, what if in different timelines he simply picked up different babies of the surviving ice giants? Maybe in many of the timelines it was a different baby altogether that he picked up, and he still called it Loki and raised it as his own child. And so that could have easily explained how come different Lokis look nothing alike. And yet they are still a Loki because they've been raised as a Loki by Odin and all of that, and yet it will make perfect sense, and so they are not the same person. That would have been my excuse if I was writing the show. That's how I would have easily explained all of these Loki variants. And yet this show is claiming that they are actually the same exact person, and at the same time shows a romantic relationship of them falling in love and kissing and making out, and the show is showing it as if it's such a romantic moment. And the power of love, it's their love that allowed them to get there and to defeat this guy and all of that. So love conquers all and all of that, and yet it's a love of a person with himself, so that's almost like incest, and so that's kind of nasty and strange. So I just don't think it's written well. Is it supposed to be romantic? Am I supposed to feel sorry for Loki, whose heart is broken by this woman who took over the show? Basically, she's the hero of the show. She's the one who is doing it all, and Loki, our Loki, became kind of a sidekick in his own show, and he's been pathetic throughout the whole show, not really doing anything, either clever or physically impressive. He's been kind of pathetic throughout the whole show. And this woman Loki is better than him in every way, and she's the one who defeats the bad guy and all of that, even though the show implies that's actually a bad thing to do that, because now his variants will rise up and they are even worse than him. But on the other hand, what was the solution? To keep this guy around, or to keep running things the way he did it, destroying every variation of the timeline that is not to his liking and all of that? So there was no real choice involved in all of this, and so all of this stuff doesn't really make any sense. It's not a real philosophical question when you think about it. It kind of touches upon all kinds of interesting questions, but it doesn't really deal with them in any. There is no real moral dilemma, there is no real conflict of intellectual topics or metaphysical topics. It kind of touches on that, but not really, because there is no real choice. And I guess all of this show is kind of just a setup for all the stuff that will come next in the MCU, all the different timelines that they want to play with and all of that, and I guess it will be fun. I guess it is a good thing they did that they kind of established that everything we've seen up until this point was actually taking place in roughly one timeline, and yet from this point on it will be more crazy, and so I'm open to that idea. Maybe it will all make it worthwhile in the end. Maybe this show will be a necessary stepping stone to get to that point, which might be a lot of fun later on. I guess we'll wait and see. Maybe this new villain and his evil variants will be an awesome villain later on. The other variants might not be as goofy as him. Maybe will be scarier and all of that, and so I guess there is a potential there for something good and interesting, but so far I'm not really that impressed. There are some good moments in this episode, But overall, most of it was just a goofy guy sitting at a table and just rambling, and his motivation isn't really that clear. Why did he need these specific two Lokis to run his timeline the way he wants? Why them specifically? Why not countless other beings in the whole universe couldn't have done that? Only these guys who are the heroes of the show, supposedly. He needs them specifically, and apparently he planned their arrival here. But if he needed them, why didn't he simply pick them up right away and take them here right away? He has that power, so why run them through that maze in which they think that they defeated his plan and got to him somehow, when actually it was his plan all along? So what's the point of all of that? I guess some of it was explained in the dialogue when he said it was all to put them in the right mindset for it, and yet in the end that plan backfired because they didn't do what he wanted. They killed him, so it's not what he wanted in the end, and so what was the point of what he did? And so none of this makes any sense if you really think about it, and I guess it only makes sense to evolve the MCU and to establish the new villain that will be his evil variant that is much more evil than this guy who is a goofball, and his variant will be more evil, and so he simply set up the future villain. But this guy is kind of an idiot, basically. He just caused his own death for nothing. Even though he supposedly ruled the universe, he got bored of it, I guess, and self-defeated his own plan of establishing one timeline, running things the way he wanted the universe to be, and yet he sabotaged himself by bringing these two guys to him, and they killed him, and bringing it all back to how it was in the past before he did all of that with the multiple timelines, and now it will be the same situation again. So what was the point of this guy again? So isn't he kind of an idiot? And I guess we should thank him because he's the one who basically wrote all those funny MCU movies, you know, all the Infinity War and all of that stuff. This guy is the one who wrote it, actually. So maybe his sense of humor is the reason all those movies were kind of funny. And so I guess he was a nice guy, so maybe they shouldn't have killed him. They should have kept him around, and so that was kind of stupid. And Loki gets transported back to the TVA, and yet it's a different version of the TVA in which they never heard about him, and now we see statues of this guy who they never called by name, but I guess that's going to be Kang the Conqueror, and apparently he's now officially the ruler of the TVA, so this is going to be the big villain in the next season, I guess, and maybe in some of the later movies, maybe we'll see him, maybe a different actor will play him, I guess we'll wait and see. So some of this stuff might be interesting later on, but it wasn't really that interesting in this episode. The only part I liked was the part when he showed his backstory using that little hologram thing that showed what happened with his variants fighting each other. That was kind of interesting, and that special effect in the beginning of flying through the universe looked really good, and so that was probably my favorite part of the episode. And the show overall, I think, could have been and should have been much better, so it is kind of disappointing, especially with Loki being so pathetic throughout the whole show and not really doing anything and just being there for the ride. They even said in this episode that he's like a flea on the back of a dragon, and so he's not really that important, he's just here for the ride. So why is he the main character of the show if he's not really achieving anything or doing anything? So that's why this show feels to me kind of disappointing and a missed opportunity in many ways, but I did like some things in it, so I can't say I hate the show. So it's just kind of meh, it's just kind of okay for a one-time viewing, and I guess it's a necessary stepping stone for the future of the MCU, which is going to play with all the different timelines and all the crazy stuff that they're planning to do next. And so I guess in that sense, maybe in retrospect, I look back at it and say this was a necessary and maybe even a good show if it sets up something great later on. So it all depends. So that's all I really had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.